How does it feel to be a failure? Victor's words didn't just land in the room they lodged in Henry Caldwell's bones. The laughter that followed was small, but sharp, like the clinking of glass in an empty hall. For 15 years, Henry had been the unseen scaffolding holding up this household, and now, here at the head of their polished mahogany table, the man who had most benefited from that quiet strength sat grinning over a glass of Cabernet Henry himself had brought. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the thought began to form tonight. They will discover just how fragile their comfort really is. Henry knew the evening was meant to be celebratory. Laura had called him a week earlier, her voice bright but slightly rushed, inviting him to dinner to toast Victor's promotion to regional sales manager. She had described the menu prime rib, roasted vegetables, warm rolls, and mentioned the expensive bottle of wine Victor was fond of. Henry had taken the hint, bought that very wine, and wrapped it in a simple brown paper bag, feeling the same mix of duty and quiet resignation he had felt too many times before. Willow Creek was in early spring, the kind where the air had a mild bite by evening, and lawns were just beginning to green. The Mercer home stood near the top of a cul-de-sac, all clean lines and curated landscaping. Henry knew that the glimmering granite counters in the kitchen, the tasteful art on the walls, even the candlelight now dancing in crystal holders, had his fingerprints on them in ways Laura's neighbors could never guess. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic, and Laura's soft jazz playlist hummed in the background as he stepped inside. Laura met him at the door in a soft cream sweater, cheeks flushed from the kitchen heat. She kissed his cheek, her eyes darting briefly toward the dining room where Victor's voice carried easily. "Dad, you look nice," she said, smoothing the sleeve of his jacket as though to reassure herself. In the dining room, Victor was already holding court. His dark hair was slicked neatly back, and his tie, a rich burgundy silk, sat just so against a crisp shirt. Sophie and Caleb sat opposite him, their chairs slightly pushed back as they watched their father dominate the table. The prime rib sat steaming on a silver platter, and beside it the bottle of wine Henry had brought now open, Victor swirling a generous pour in his glass. Henry took his seat midway down the table, noticing with a detached sort of curiosity how Victor had placed himself at the head. Years ago, Henry's place had been there, carving turkey at Thanksgiving, or ladling soup at Christmas. He let it go. "Henry," Victor said warmly enough, though the warmth didn't reach his eyes. "Good to see you. Retirement must be treating you well. No pressure, no deadlines, no real responsibilities." Henry set down his fork carefully, the piece of prime rib growing cold before him. He saw Laura shift uncomfortably, reaching for her water glass, her silver bracelet, the one Henry had given her last Christmas, catching the light. "It has its moments," Henry replied evenly. Victor leaned back in his chair, the picture of ease. "I mean, you had a decent run as an engineer, right? But that was, 40 years ago? Whole different world now. Everything's digital, fast-paced. Takes a younger mind to really succeed." Laura's eyes flickered to her father's face, but she stayed silent. Sophie, sensing the tension in the way children do, looked up from her plate. "Grandpa built me a treehouse last summer," she piped in. "That's sweet, honey," Victor said, patting her head. "But real men provide for their families through their own hard work, not by coasting while others carry the load." The clink of cutlery dulled. Caleb glanced from his father to his grandfather, his brow furrowed. Laura gave a quick, brittle laugh. "Maybe we should talk about something else. Sophie, tell Grandpa about your piano recital." But Victor wasn't finished. He took another sip of wine, the dark liquid sliding smoothly in the glass. "Actually, I've been thinking, now that I'm bringing in 6 figures, maybe it's time everyone started pulling their own weight." Henry didn't need the specifics. He knew exactly what Victor meant. He thought of the monthly mortgage assistance, the car leases, the school tuition, the insurance premiums, all handled without fanfare since Martha's passing. 15 years of steady, quiet giving, while Victor enjoyed the trappings without once considering the source. Victor gestured toward Laura with his wine glass. She's been out of the workforce so long, living off well. Let's call it family charity. Maybe it's time she rejoined the real world. Laura's face went pale. She knew as well as Henry that their life, the private school uniforms hanging in the mudroom, the vacation photographs framed in the hallway, the renovated kitchen, all of it was possible because Henry had filled the gaps without complaint. Caleb's small voice broke into the stillness. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" "No, son," Victor said smoothly. "But it's important to know the difference between earners and dependents, between providers and—" He looked directly at Henry, "those who've given up trying." The words hung in the air like smoke. Henry took a slow breath, feeling the weight of every eye on him. He could have risen and left then, could have let the insult pass for the sake of peace. But something in the smug tilt of Victor's chin settled the matter in Henry's mind. "How does it feel?" Henry said, his voice steady and clear. "To know this failure won't be paying your bills anymore?" The effect was immediate. Victor's face blanched. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. The children sat frozen. Henry cut another piece of meat with careful precision, chewed and swallowed. Outside, a faint breeze rattled the bare branches along the street. Conversation stumbled on for a few awkward minutes, Caleb muttering something about school, Laura attempting to redirect with talk of Sophie's recital, but the air was gone from the room. The celebration had soured. Henry placed his fork on the edge of his plate, folded his napkin neatly, and rose from his seat. "Thank you for dinner, Laura. It was delicious." She half stood, as though to stop him, but no words came. He walked to the front door, lifted his coat from the closet hook, and stepped out into the March evening. The air was cool and smelled faintly of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. His shoes made a measured sound on the driveway as he walked to his car. By the time he backed out onto the street, the decision had settled fully in him. The weight of 15 years of quiet sacrifice no longer felt like duty. It felt like chains, and he was ready to take them off. I stood, thanked Laura for dinner, and walked out into the cool March night, already knowing what I had to do next. By the time the sun came up, Henry had already decided exactly how to dismantle 15 years of financial dependence. The decision sat in him like a stone in calm water, heavy, unmoving, certain. It was not anger that drove him, but clarity, the kind that comes after a long night of replaying every slight, every assumption, every time Victor had spoken as though the life he lived was entirely of his own making. Martha's voice came to him faintly in the quiet house, a memory from those last weeks in the hospital. "Make sure Laura is secure." At the time, he had understood it as a promise to protect her until she could stand on her own. Somewhere along the way, that meaning had twisted. Instead of security, it had bred dependence. Instead of gratitude, expectation. That promise had kept him from saying no when he should have, had kept the payments flowing even when his own savings shrank. Last night had made it clear the promise had been honored. And then some. Now it was time to stop. The morning light fell across his study in narrow bands, filtered through blinds he had never replaced because they still worked just fine. The room smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish, the air cool enough for him to notice through the sleeves of his sweater. Against one wall, the filing cabinet stood like sentries, each drawer neatly labeled. He sat at the desk, switched on the brass lamp, and pulled open the drawer marked 2009 to 2012. The manila folders inside were as precise as a blueprint. Blue tabs for mortgage assistance, green for auto loans, yellow for school tuition, red for insurance and medical bills. He began with the mortgage. The familiar numbers scrolled down each statement $2,800 every month, without fail. He stacked the years in a neat pile, the weight of the paper a physical reminder of what had been carried. The calculator's buttons clicked softly under his fingers, and the total appeared without ceremony. Just over $500,000 in mortgage payments alone. One by one, he worked through the rest. 8 years of car payments for both Laura's SUV and Victor's leased BMW. Medical insurance premiums during Victor's between-jobs periods, emergency dental work for Sophie, a broken arm for Caleb after a baseball game. Private school tuition $24,000 a year, more when summer camps and language programs were included. Even vacations had their folders. Disney World, a European cruise, ski rentals in Aspen, all paid without fanfare, without repayment. The sum climbed steadily towards the number he had carried in his head for years. $976,200. The clock on the wall ticked into the mid-morning as he picked up the phone. The first call went to First National Bank. A young woman named Jennifer answered, her voice polite and brisk. "I need to cancel automatic payments from checking account 457899422156, Henry said, his tone steady as if delivering a report in his engineering days. She verified his identity, then confirmed the payments would be discontinued immediately. He wrote the confirmation number in his notebook, drew a line through mortgage assistance, $2,800 monthly, and moved to the next. Colorado Mountain Insurance required a transfer to a supervisor. The BMW lease cancellation bounced him through 3 different extensions. Each time, Henry listened to the hold music without irritation, noting the names of those he spoke to, the times, and the reference numbers. The process was not rushed. It was deliberate. By 11:15 a.m., 8 items were crossed off the list. At 11:47, the phone rang. Laura's voice came down the line, uncertain. "Dad, something strange happened with the mortgage payment. The bank called, they said there were insufficient funds in the account. But that doesn't make sense because..." She broke off. "Because you assumed I'd keep paying forever," Henry finished for her. Silence stretched thin. "What do you mean?" "Exactly what I said last night. I'm no longer covering your expenses." Her breath hitched. "Dad, you can't just the mortgage, the insurance, Caleb's school. All discontinued as of this morning. This isn't funny. We'll lose the house. Then you'll need to figure out how to pay for it yourselves." The line went dead. He set the phone down without looking at it, turned the page in his notebook, and continued. The utilities department was surprisingly efficient. Centura Academy's accounting office asked only for the student names and the last payment date. By the time he finished the final call, the neat lines of his notes had formed something like a battle map. Each payment, each amount, each cancellation complete. The phone rang again at 12:23 p.m. Laura's voice was sharper now, fear beginning to slip in around the edges. "Dad, the school called. The insurance company, too. They're all saying payments were declined." "They weren't declined," Henry said. "They were canceled. By me." A beat of silence, then softer. "Your accounts?" "Did you think the payments came from somewhere else, Laura?" I didn't think about it. We never asked you to." "You never asked because you never had to. I simply did it. We can't afford." She stopped herself. "That's the point," Henry said. At 12:31, Victor's voice came over the line, forced calm that didn't hide the edge beneath. "Henry, whatever game you're playing needs to stop right now." No game. Just reality. You can't destroy our family because your feelings got hurt at dinner. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just no longer financing it. You wanted to know how it feels to be a failure? Figure out your own bills. There was no reply this time, only the click of the line going dead. Henry closed his notebook, slid his pen into its holder, and leaned back in the leather chair. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Outside, the sky had cleared into a pale blue, the kind that promised a cold night ahead. He sat for a long moment, the weight of what he'd done settling around him like a heavy coat, not unwelcome, but undeniable. At 1:15 p.m., the quiet was broken by the low growl of Victor's BMW pulling into the driveway. The sound of the car door slamming was followed by the sharp rhythm of footsteps on the front walk. At 1:15 p.m., I heard the roar of Victor's BMW in my driveway. Victor didn't knock, he barged in like he still owned the place. The front door swung hard enough to rattle the framed photographs in the hallway, the glass catching a sliver of afternoon light as it trembled. Henry Caldwell did not rise right away. He sat in his worn leather chair, the one Martha had given him for their 20th anniversary, feeling the familiar give of the cushion and the small creak in the arm when he shifted his weight. He had placed a mug of coffee on the coaster beside him, not out of indulgence, but because routine mattered. Rituals steadied the hand when family tried to shake it. Victor Mercer crossed the threshold with the restless energy of a man accustomed to getting his way. His tie was still knotted tight, his jaw set harder than usual, his eyes bright with a cocktail of indignation and fear he was not yet willing to acknowledge. Laura came behind him, cheeks blotched, hair gathered in a quick twist that said she had left the house in a hurry. She closed the door softly, as if her gentleness could undo his entrance. "Henry," Victor said, planting himself in the center of the living room, "this ridiculous tantrum ends now." Henry looked at the man who had married his daughter. There was a time when Victor stood in this room holding out a bottle of inexpensive scotch and calling him Sir with unforced respect. Now Victor's shoes drew a line across the rug, his presence an uninvited flag in ground he had not earned. Henry folded his hands, the light from the window laying a thin gold bar across his knuckles. "Please," Henry said, his voice even, "come in." Victor laughed once, short and sharp. "You will call the bank. You will restore the mortgage payment, the tuition, the insurance, the car leases. All of it. You do not get to play games with a family's life because your pride was hurt at dinner." Laura stood near the doorway, fingers twisting around one another, eyes shining. "Dad," she said, "please let us talk. Just talk." Henry nodded to the sofa. "Sit." They did not. Victor stayed standing, pacing to the mantel and back, like a caged man who blamed the bars on someone else's locksmith. Laura swallowed. "Dad, the school called this morning. They said Sophie and Caleb's tuition payment did not go through. The mortgage payment bounced. The insurance." She stopped, breath snagging on the word. Henry let a quiet pass, not cruel, not indulgent, only honest. "What would you like to discuss?" Victor spun toward him. "Your obligation." "My obligation?" "To your daughter and your grandchildren," Victor said. "You have been paying these bills for years. That creates a precedent, an understanding." Henry raised a single brow. "Show me the contract where I agreed to pay your bills forever." Victor's mouth opened, then closed. He shifted tactics. "You cannot cut us off without warning. It is elder financial abuse to manipulate a family's stability like this." Laura flinched at the phrase. Henry's eyes, which had softened at his daughter's voice, returned to granite. "Victor," he said, "if you know an attorney who handles elder financial abuse, please call. I would like him to take a look at the last 15 years. Laura's gaze flicked to the filing cabinets along the hallway wall, as if she could feel what waited there, even with the drawers closed. Henry stood at last, joints uncomplaining, and walked with measured steps to his study. The room smelled faintly of furniture polish and paper edges. He opened a drawer, pulled out a blue tabbed folder, then a green, a yellow, and a red. He carried them to the living room and set them carefully on the coffee table, aligning corners out of old habit. "What is this?" Victor asked, though his tone made it clear he already understood. "Mortgage assistance," Henry said, tapping the blue. "Auto loans and leases," he said, tapping the green. He laid a palm on the yellow. "Tuition." His hand rested finally on red. "Insurance and medical bills. There are others, vacations, emergencies, gifts that were never named as such because I did not want to embarrass anyone." Laura's breath shook. "Dad, we did not ask you to—" "You never asked," Henry said quietly. "You simply expected?" Victor made a sound that was meant to be dismissive and came out thin. "You are exaggerating." Henry lifted the top sheet of the mortgage folder. The numbers marched down the page in tidy columns, as unemotional as rainfall. He placed that sheet beside a second, then a third, building a small wall of paper between himself and the man who refused to see what had been holding him up. $2,800, Henry said, every month for 15 years. He set the mortgage sheets aside and lifted another set. Laura's SUV, Victor's BMW lease, 8 years combined, insurance premiums during unemployment periods, dental for Sophie, an emergency room visit for Caleb after he slid into home plate and caught an elbow, tuition for private school, plus language camps in the summer. And then there is what does not fit neatly here. He touched the corner of the red folder. Car repairs the night before a road trip, a deposit on your kitchen renovation when you wanted to keep the contractor's calendar, Christmases and birthdays when the children's wish lists ran long because you wanted them to have everything you never did. Victor's shoulders twitched. "A father helps," he said. "A father does," Henry agreed. "A father also teaches. Somewhere along the way, I forgot the second part because the first part felt so urgent." "How much?" Laura whispered, as if saying it softly could make the answer smaller. Henry lifted his notebook and opened to a page that had felt heavy in his hands for hours. He did not announce the figure like a verdict. He set it down like a final brick in a long, unseen foundation. $976,200. Laura's eyes filled so quickly the room seemed to tilt. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and stared at the broken light splintering across the coffee table. Victor scoffed, but the sound faltered in his throat. "That cannot be right," he said. Henry met his eyes. "It is not a guess." He waited, not out of cruelty, but because silence has a way of letting truth rise to the surface unassisted. Victor broke first, mirroring the movement of a man whose feet have found that the floor is not where he believed. "Fine," Victor said. "Let us say it is correct. You did this by choice. No one forced you. You wanted to help. Now you are using it to humiliate us." Henry smoothed the edge of a sheet that did not need smoothing. "I am using it to explain why the help has ended." Laura took a step toward her father. "Dad," she said, her voice low and raw, "what do you want from us?" He looked at her, at the woman who had been a girl who scraped her knee on the driveway, and ran to him with tears that dried as soon as his hand gentled her hair. He thought of Martha, of a bedside promise that had been meant to keep a storm at bay, not to build a harbor they could never afford to leave. "I want you to live within what you earn," Henry said. "I will support Sophie and Caleb, tuition, clothing, medical needs, sports, and music. I will set college funds for both. I will not pay your mortgage. I will not pay for car leases or your insurance or your vacations. The money for the children will go directly to the schools and providers, not through you." Victor's face flushed, a quick suffusion of heat and humiliation. "You cannot split a family like that," he said. "We are a unit." "Teams," Henry said softly, "require mutual respect. When did either of you last thank me for anything?" The question did not land like a slap. It landed like something heavier, older, as if the room itself had been waiting for him to ask it. Laura's gaze dropped to the carpet. Victor looked away first, scanning the room for something to fix, some target easier than a man who refused to rise to his bait. "You did not answer," Henry said. Laura's voice, when it returned, was the voice of the woman who used to call him twice a week just to say, "How was your day?" "I should have, Dad," she said. "I should have thanked you every month. I do not know when I stopped." Victor paced to the mantel and back again, hands opening and closing as if measuring a space he could not finish. "This is not reasonable," he said, locking on to the word as if it were a rope. "We have a house, children who need stability. You cannot yank away a foundation without warning and pretend you are teaching a lesson." Henry considered the fireplace. He had laid hearths in houses that were not his, taught interns how to calculate load, told them buildings fail not from a single bad beam, but from 100 small neglects. "I am not yanking," he said. "I am stepping back from a job that was always meant to be temporary. If you would like to continue in this house, pay its price. If you cannot, choose a different house." Laura pressed a hand to her chest, as if she could steady the rhythm beneath it. "Dad, She looked at Victor, then at her father again. "We did not see it. We did not want to see it." Victor turned on her. "Do not start," he said. We have done nothing wrong except accept help offered." She flinched and moved slightly closer to the arm of the sofa, as if distance could soften his words. The old clock on Henry's mantel ticked, a sound that had been companion and metronome for decades. "Victor," Henry said, calm back in place like a well-hung door. "You threatened legal action a moment ago. You said an attorney might accuse me of elder financial abuse. Do you know what I would say if he called?" Victor folded his arms. "Enlighten me." "I would say that a retired man with a modest home and a sensible truck spent nearly $1 million propping up a household with granite counters and luxury cars. I would say the abuse in that arrangement did not flow in the direction you think." Color rose along Victor's neck. He was a man accustomed to making the last remark at the table, to closing arguments that sounded like strategy but were mostly volume. He opened his mouth, then closed it again and changed lines of attack. "Are you punishing us for what I said last night?" he asked. "Is that what this is?" Henry considered the question, then shook his head. "Last night was not a cause. It was a diagnosis. Arrogance like that does not appear in a day. It grows in the shadow of dependence. It was time to turn on a light." Laura's eyes lifted, wet but clearer. "Then what happens now?" "Now," Henry said, "I will do what I said. I will see to the children's needs. You will handle your own. You may apologize publicly if you like, but my money will not move with or without your apology. It will move only with the children's need." Victor bristled. "Public apology? To whom?" "To the truth," Henry said, "and to anyone you told that I abandoned you, when in fact I simply stopped funding a lie you told yourselves." Laura made a small sound, not quite a sob. "Dad, I am sorry," she said, "for last night, for the months, the years when I took and did not say thank you, for believing that your help was the same thing as our income." She swallowed. "Please, for Sophie and Caleb, do not shut them out because we failed." "I am not shutting them out," Henry said. "I am pulling them closer." Victor's composure thinned, anger showing like the white of a nail when the hand is clenched too tight. "You cannot control us by controlling the children," he said. Henry's voice did not rise. "Control is what you call it when a boundary is finally drawn on a map you mistook for your own." He could feel the house around him, all its quiet witness, the indented spot on the sofa where Martha liked to read, the photo of Laura at age 8 with her front teeth missing, holding a baseball glove that dwarfed her hand, the small chip on the coffee table's edge from the night Caleb's toy car had skidded farther than expected. This was his home, and he would not let arrogance echo in it without answer. Victor tried another angle. "You will make the mortgage payment now," he said, "and we will talk about the rest like civilized people." "No," Henry said. "Then you are forcing your daughter and your grandchildren into crisis." "I am forcing them into reality." Laura sank onto the sofa at last, the cushion releasing air with a soft sigh. She folded her hands, looked at them, then looked up. "What would you have us do?" "Work," Henry said gently. "Budget. Sell what you cannot afford to keep. Live where your income allows. Be grateful when someone covers what is theirs to cover, and do not ask them to cover what is not." Victor's laugh was brittle. "You think it is that simple?" "I think simple and easy are not the same thing," Henry said. No one spoke for several breaths. There is a kind of silence that punishes, and a kind that heals. This one did neither. It simply drew a line between two eras of the same family. Victor cleared his throat. "If you proceed with this boundary, you will lose us." Henry regarded him steadily. "I lost you when my help became your right." Laura flinched again, but this time the motion came with a clarity, a small straightening of the spine. "Victor," she said quietly, "he is not wrong." Victor turned to her. For a heartbeat, Henry saw the boyish fear underneath the bluster, the worry that he was not enough without an invisible hand beneath him. Then pride rose again and covered it. He faced Henry. "Last chance," he said. "Restore the payments, the mortgage, the cars, the tuition, or we will do what we must." Henry nodded once, as if acknowledging an engineer's final review. "Do what you must." Victor's mouth tightened. He turned toward the door, and Laura stood too, hesitating, eyes on her father. Henry stepped to her, and for a moment they were close enough that he could have reached up and tucked the stray hair behind her ear the way he used to when she was tired from studying late. He did not. He let the moment stand on its own legs. "Laura," he said softly, "tell the children I love them. I will see them this weekend. We will talk about music lessons and soccer cleats. We will not talk about mortgages." She nodded, tears breaking cleanly now, not dramatics, but release. "I will tell them," she whispered. Victor opened the door. Cold air stepped in, bringing the scent of thawing earth and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. He paused, looking back over his shoulder with an expression that tried for contempt, and only reached exhaustion. There was a second when he seemed to search Henry's face for a last-minute softening, the habitual balm he had relied on for years. Henry held his gaze, steady as a plumb line. They left without another word, but I knew this battle was only beginning. It wasn't just Henry's house they were fighting him in anymore, it was the whole town. Word had a way of moving through Willow Creek faster than the wind over the lake. By the following week, neighbors who normally waved from their porches without a second thought were stopping Henry at the mailbox or catching him in the grocery aisle, their faces wearing a mixture of curiosity and caution. He knew before they spoke that Victor had been busy. At the hardware store on Wednesday morning, Evelyn Brooks cornered him between the paint aisle and the key-cutting station. She was holding a gallon of eggshell white in one hand, but her eyes were sharp. "Henry, I heard some troubling things," she began, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel like a confession. "Victor says you've cut off Laura and the children, that they're in danger of losing the house. Is it true?" Henry straightened the receipt in his pocket before answering. "I've stopped paying their bills," he said plainly. "After 15 years, I think that's reasonable." Her brows knit together. 15 years? $976,000, $200 worth of mortgage, tuition, insurance, and more, he said, watching the number settle in her mind. Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. "I didn't know," she admitted. "I imagine you weren't meant to," Henry said, and picked up the box of nails he'd come in for. Later that afternoon, Frank Dawson waved him over from behind the counter at Dawson's Hardware. Frank was a big man with the habit of leaning on the counter like it was a rail fence. "Henry, you'll want to hear this," he said in a low tone. "I was at Murphy's bar last night. Victor was in there telling folks you abandoned them without warning, making out like you're punishing your grandkids." Henry set his nails on the counter. And, Frank continued, "Bill Henderson was there, you remember? Sold them that BMW? Bill pipes up and says he wondered how Victor could afford a $60,000 car on his salary. Then he tells the whole bar he remembers you co-signing the lease. Place went quiet real fast after that." Henry allowed himself a small, humorless smile. "I'm not interested in a barroom debate, Frank. I just answer honestly when people ask me directly." Frank nodded. "You don't have to say a thing. Folks will start putting it together." By Friday, it was clear they already were. In the grocery store, as Henry compared prices on coffee, a woman from church approached him. "I can't believe you're turning your back on your family," she said, her tone heavy with judgment. Henry met her eyes, calm. "For 15 years, I've covered their mortgage, their cars, their children's private school, and their insurance. Nearly $1 million. I'm still covering my grandchildren's needs directly. I've stopped paying for their lifestyle." The woman's lips tightened. She had no reply. That evening, on his porch, Henry listened to the spring frogs beginning to call down by the creek and thought about how quickly a narrative could take root if left unchecked. He didn't chase people down to correct them. He didn't have to. Every question was an opportunity for the truth to quietly surface. The real shift came the next morning, when Evelyn called again. "Henry, I think you should know people are starting to ask Laura why she never mentioned how much you've done. She's not answering. That says something." Henry didn't respond right away. In a small town, silence could be as revealing as speech. That afternoon, he saw Victor across the street, talking animatedly to a neighbor. Henry couldn't hear the words, but he caught the stiff set of Victor's shoulders, the way his hands cut through the air in wide gestures. The neighbor listened, nodded slowly, then glanced toward Henry's house. There was no smile in that glance, only a kind of measuring. Henry let the moment pass, without signaling back. It wasn't a game to him, and he wasn't looking to score points. He was simply reclaiming ground he'd ceded for too long. In the midst of it all, Sophie and Caleb came by with Laura to drop off a tin of cookies they'd baked at home. Sophie, bright-eyed but perceptive, asked, "Grandpa, are people mad at you?" He crouched to her level. "Some people don't understand everything that's happened. That's all right. You and Caleb know I love you. That's what matters." Caleb looked from his sister to his grandfather. "Dad says you stopped helping us," he said, the question hanging there. Henry smiled gently. "I'm still helping you. I'm just helping in a different way now." They seemed to accept that, though Henry could see the questions weren't gone, only resting for the moment. On Sunday morning, he passed the town square on his way to the post office and noticed two men on a bench talking in low tones. One nodded toward him, and the other's expression shifted, as if a piece of a puzzle had just fallen into place. It wasn't animosity. It was recognition. The tide was turning, slowly but unmistakably. Every person who heard the full story became a quiet counterweight to Victor's version, and in a town like Willow Creek, enough counterweights could shift the whole balance. The next call Henry got wasn't from a neighbor, it was from Laura, and she sounded desperate. By Thursday, they weren't just broke, they were breaking. The strain was written in the small details first. The pristine Mercer driveway, once home to a gleaming black BMW, now had a narrow gap where the car had been. Laura's old Honda Civic sat crookedly in its place, its paint dulled by years of parking lot sun. Curtains that had always been drawn to just the right angle now hung slightly askew, as if no one had time to fuss with them anymore. Henry saw it all on his morning walk. The foreclosure notice taped to their front door wasn't visible from the street, but he caught the corner of white peeking out when the wind stirred. The official lettering, the kind every homeowner dreaded, was just legible enough. 30 days to remit payment or vacate the premises. He didn't slow his pace, didn't knock, but he carried the image with him all the way home. By midweek, Laura was wearing a blue grocery store vest. Henry noticed it the first time at Henderson's Market. She was stationed at checkout, scanning canned goods and boxes of cereal with mechanical precision. Her smile was small and tired when Mrs. Brooks came through her lane, asking in a bright but pointed tone, "Laura, dear, I didn't know you were working here." Laura kept her eyes on the register screen. "Started Monday. Paper or plastic?" Later that evening, Sophie and Caleb showed up at Henry's door. They still had the easy manner of children who felt welcome, but their words carried a new weight. Sophie perched on the edge of the sofa, twisting her hands in her lap. "Grandpa, Mom, and Dad are fighting all the time now. Dad says her job doesn't pay enough to matter. Mom says he never made enough either. And then, they said mean things about you." Henry listened, keeping his voice steady. "What kind of mean things?" Caleb spoke up from the armchair. "That you ruined everything on purpose, but then Mom started crying and said maybe they ruined it themselves." The boy's words landed in the quiet space between them, a truth too big for his age, but unavoidable. Henry offered them cookies and let the conversation drift to school projects and soccer games. He walked them home at dusk, the Honda parked in the driveway under the yellow porch light, its hood speckled with early spring pollen. 2 days later, Laura came to see him alone. The grocery store vest was still on, wrinkled from a long shift. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, her posture smaller than he remembered. "Dad," she began, sitting heavily in the same chair she'd once occupied beside Victor. "I need to talk about Sophie and Caleb. They're scared. Sophie had a nightmare last night about leaving her room behind. Caleb keeps asking if they'll have to go to a new school." Henry said nothing, letting her fill the silence. "I've been working 40 hours a week on my feet," she continued, "scanning groceries for people who used to be my friends. Yesterday, Mrs. Henderson came through my line. I wanted to crawl under the counter, but I didn't. I smiled and asked paper or plastic because I finally understand what work means, what earning means, what you've been trying to teach us." Henry studied her, weighing her words. "And what does Victor think of this?" Her mouth tightened. "He's angry. He says public apologies are humiliation. Says he won't stand in front of the neighbors and admit he's been a charity case. But we have 4 days until foreclosure. The children's lives will change forever if we lose the house." Henry outlined his conditions again. He would fund Sophie and Caleb's schooling, clothing, activities, medical needs, and college savings directly, nothing for the mortgage, car payments, or adult expenses, and the public acknowledgments and apologies were non-negotiable. Laura swallowed. "I'll tell him, but I don't know if I can convince him." That night, through the blinds of his study, Henry saw the Civic pull into their driveway. Laura went inside with her purse over her shoulder. The porch light caught her profile for a moment, set with resolve and fatigue. Inside the Mercer kitchen, she found Victor reheating pizza, the microwave hum filling the room. "Where have you been?" he asked. "I went to see Dad." The microwave beeped. He set the plate down with a dull thud. "We talked about handling this together." "We have 4 days, Victor. The children are terrified. I had to try something. Mifsum." She told him Henry's terms. At first, Victor brightened at the thought of tuition and expenses for the children being covered, but his face fell when she said the mortgage was excluded. His expression darkened further when she explained the requirement for public apologies. "He wants me to humiliate myself? Admit to the whole town I couldn't provide for my own family?" "He spent nearly $1 million on us," Laura said quietly. "That's not charity, that's love. And we treated it like it was ours by right." Upstairs, Sophie called down. "Mom, Dad, are you fighting about Grandpa again?" Laura climbed the stairs, leaving Victor pacing in the kitchen, his hands clenched into fists. When she returned, he was staring at the foreclosure notice on the counter. "I won't do it," he said. "I won't crawl to your father and beg." "Then where will we live?" she asked, her voice low. Victor didn't answer. 4 days, he had said. 4 days to decide before the offer expired. Monday morning, the Civic rolled into Henry's driveway, all 4 of them inside, but not together in spirit. The car door opened first for Laura, who stepped out with a manila folder tucked under her arm and a look that mixed resignation with resolve. Sophie and Caleb climbed out next, dressed in their school uniforms, their backpacks resting heavily on small shoulders. Victor emerged last, straightening his wrinkled shirt as though to reclaim some semblance of order. Henry opened the front door before they knocked. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The children went to the couch instinctively, sitting close together. Laura took the same chair she'd occupied during her visit 2 days earlier, hands gripping the folder like a lifeline. Victor remained standing behind them, his posture formal but drained. "The bank called this morning," Laura began, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Foreclosure completes at 3 o'clock today unless we pay $8,625. We don't have it." Sophie looked up, her voice small. "Grandpa, are we really going to lose our house?" Henry's gaze softened for her. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart." Victor cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Henry, I need to say some things." His eyes flicked toward the wedding photo of Henry and Martha on the mantel before returning to meet Henry's. 15 years ago, you offered to help us temporarily. I took that help and let it become permanent without acknowledging what you were sacrificing. I told people the house renovations were from my success at work. I let the kids think their grandfather was just being generous instead of being their provider. I never gave you the credit you deserved." His voice caught for just a moment, but he steadied himself. Laura's voice followed, quieter but steady. "I owe you apologies, too. I treated your help like an inheritance, not a choice you made. I stopped saying thank you a long time ago. You paid our mortgage, our cars, insurance, tuition, medical bills, vacations, even the little things like Caleb's baseball league and Sophie's dance classes. We acted like it was ours by right." Caleb turned to her, startled. "Grandpa paid for my baseball?" Laura nodded. "Grandpa paid for everything." Sophie's brows drew together. "Why didn't you tell us?" Laura's answer came with visible regret. "Because we were ashamed not of his help, but of how we acted like we didn't need it." Henry leaned forward in his chair, speaking evenly. "If I help you keep the house today, things will be different. I'll pay for Sophie and Caleb's school tuition directly to Centura Academy. I'll cover their medical expenses, clothing, activities, and college funds. But I won't pay your mortgage, car payments, or any adult expenses. You'll live on what you actually earn." Victor nodded slowly. "We understand." "There's more," Henry said. "I want public acknowledgement, a letter to the Willow Creek Gazette thanking me for 15 years of support, a social media post, and face-to-face apologies to the neighbors you misled." Laura hesitated. "When?" "This week, before Saturday." Victor's jaw tightened, but he gave a short nod. "What else?" "Monthly family dinners here," Henry continued. "Not to talk finances, but to remember what family means: respect, not entitlement." He rose, walking to his desk, and pulled out his checkbook. "I'll call First National and arrange an emergency payment. But this is the last mortgage payment I will ever make for you. After today, you sink or swim on your own income." As he dialed, Sophie leaned toward her mother. "Are we going to be okay now?" Laura's voice was soft, but certain in a way Henry hadn't heard in years. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine." 3 months later, they arrived at Henry's door on time, budget in hand, and for the first time, he believed them. There comes a time in life when silence no longer protects you, when enduring quietly is no longer an act of love, but an invitation for others to keep taking. For Henry, that time came not in a moment of rage, but in a moment of absolute clarity. He had given his son and daughter-in-law 15 years of sacrifice, years of paying their bills, carrying their debt, protecting their image, and shielding their children from the truth. He had done it because he believed in family, because he wanted to see them stand on their own without feeling the weight of constant financial strain. But as those years passed, gratitude eroded into entitlement, and respect faded into presumption. The lesson in this story is not about money. It is not about the act of writing checks or keeping a roof over someone's head. It is about respect, acknowledgement, and the invisible line where generosity becomes exploitation. Henry's journey was one so many parents know all too well: loving your children enough to give them the best of what you have, only to watch them treat it as something they deserved by default. What turned the tide wasn't anger, but resolve. Henry realized that real love sometimes means letting people face the truth without your shield protecting them. It means drawing boundaries so that your worth is recognized and not assumed. It means remembering that self-respect is not selfishness, it is the foundation for every healthy relationship. Henry's confrontation was not a shouting match. It was a carefully planned moment of accountability. He demanded acknowledgement, not as a boast, but as a correction to a story that had been told wrong for too long. He insisted on public gratitude and private change, making it clear that the days of endless financial rescue were over. In doing so, he taught his family something they could not learn from another check in the mail: the weight of responsibility, the value of truth, and the importance of humility. This conclusion is more than a resolution to one family's financial crisis. It is a reminder to everyone listening that sacrifice without recognition will eventually break even the strongest bond. That those who love you are not obligated to carry you forever, and those who truly care will respect your boundaries once they understand them. Henry's family did not just get their home saved, they got their perspective restored. The greatest victory here was not in paying the mortgage, but in resetting the family dynamic. By reclaiming control over where his money went and where it no longer would, Henry reclaimed control over his role in the family. He was no longer the silent provider in the background, but the respected patriarch who set the terms of his own generosity. And in those terms, there was both love and firmness, both compassion and clarity. The philosophy remains: generosity without respect breeds arrogance. Boundaries with love create dignity. For the older American listening to this, Perhaps you've been there, giving without being thanked, enduring without being recognized, loving without being valued. This story is your permission to set the rules, to speak your truth, and to reclaim your self-worth. Family does not mean tolerating disrespect. Family means loving each other enough to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Henry's decision will be remembered in his family not as the day he stopped paying, but as the day they started seeing him for who he truly was, the man who made their life possible and then made them stand on their own 2 feet. In the years to come, the grandchildren will understand that lesson too. They will know their grandfather as the man who saved the house and saved the family's integrity in one decisive act. And for everyone else listening, if you've ever felt taken for granted, remember this: you are allowed to change the terms of your giving. You are allowed to demand respect with your generosity. You are allowed to choose peace over resentment. If you like this story, leave the number 1 in the comments and subscribe to our channel so you can hear the next story, one that might remind you again why self-respect, above all else, is the foundation of every family worth keeping.